spending any of the money.
Sure.
So,
That's how I read it.
yeah.
But it seemed like the proposal was they were gonna create a stabilization account at, say, $200,000.
Yeah.
Whatever money is not expended would carry over in that
Yes.
account.
Yeah,
Following years, it would accrue.
stabilization funds just, you don't have to zero them out,
Right. So it would stay there and it would accrue interest into the same account,
in theory.
in theory.
It's hard to accrue any interest anywhere these days.
Well, yeah, but in theory, it would accrue interest.
In theory.
So if we didn't spend the $200,000 next year, hopefully it's more than 200, because we've gotten interest off of it. That's how I read it.
$200,010.
I would hope it's a little more than that.
No, we can't get anything over 1% because of the what we have to invest
Well,
in.
it's still $2,000.
No, you can use up to 2% of your net school spending budget. So this year we're
That's
at
max.
1.562.
That's just a max.
That's the max amount you can have.
All right, what's 2% of a $70 million budget?
1.562 million.
Yeah, so we're not even gonna get anywhere, so we are years
And I will get to
away
this, but
from.
I think the concern is what
point is,
the follow-up funding is.
Why have two zero balance accounts when you've got one?
Well, I mean, the way I looked at it is,
Unless
The
they're,
way-
unless
fair, right, the way I funded it, the way I read this was they were gonna create it, they were gonna put the money in, and if we use it, then come next year, they would put more money in. That's how I'm looking at it.
it doesn't become we already gave it to you. You're gonna have to find it on your own now. You have
It doesn't work that way.
I get that.
So long as it's not where the carryover funds go.
I agree.
A certain carryover.
So I wanna see what he said.
I think the most recent carryover funds, they had a recommendation by the audit firms to move those funds to special.
In terms of, they already built it.
The carryover, so like, there was a specific carryover account, that's what we're talking about.
That's not a carryover account, that's not what that is.
I'm sorry, so
what I
the
think-
stabilization.
It's not for carryover, he has to be able to use whatever we money wants
Eliminates
to carryover any way we want.
the stabilization fund, the special education stabilization fund.
So you think that money is coming out of our budget?
No, definitely not. The way I read it is they're gonna start it at $200,000. And it'll accrue into
Where did I miss the 200,000?
Last year.
That's what that's in the paper.
Oh, is that where I got it? I know, like, I didn't come up with that. I got that somewhere. I don't know where I got it from. Oh, you know what? It's probably like in the emails back and forth with Jim Ham.
Bless you. Gotta do it.
All right, you ready?
Oh, we are ready.
Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Attleboro School Committee meeting of Monday, April 22nd, 2019. Start our meeting tonight with the public hearing on the proposed fiscal year 20 budget for the Attleboro Public Schools. Published in the paper was the proposed level service budget for the schools, which is one of several options that have been supplied to the school committee in previous meetings. So this time, I'd entertain anyone who wants to come forward and speak in favor of the proposed budget. Okay, and I will also, thank you, Mr. Larson, remind everyone that this meeting is being electronically recorded. Is there anyone who would like to come and speak against the proposed budget? Anyone who'd like to come and speak against the proposed budget? Anyone who would like to speak neither for nor against the proposed budget? All right, since it's 7:50, 6:50, excuse, 6:48, I'm just going to keep it open for another couple minutes in case there are any stragglers, and if not, we will close the public hearing and start the rest of the meeting in 2 minutes.
Non-essential maintenance, safety concerns,
Mhm.
along painting plus.
Okay, it's now 6:50, so I'll go ahead and close the public forum on the fiscal year 20 budget and move on to our general agenda for tonight and start with our spotlight event on the box program. I'll turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Regan.
Thank you, Chairman Withers. So we're fortunate tonight to have representatives from both Box and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts present an exciting grant opportunity that they've provided to us. So at this time, I'd like to invite Christine Lyons and Kathleen Tully up to the table.
And we can bring Sarah Stephanie up as well
Sure.
from Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm just going
Hi,
to run
everyone.
the slides here and give the stage to these two lovely ladies.
I'm happy to be here. I just did not realize I left Boston Seaport District at like 10 to 5. I was like, oh, I have plenty of time. and it spit me off of 95 in Foxborough, made me go through some cute neighborhoods and then put me back on 95. Not sure what that was about. And the one other story I have to tell, sorry, is I just have to tell this story because it happened today in Natick, and you're all school administrators, so you'll totally empathize, but I was sitting at work and I got a phone call from my daughter at noon. And I was like, why is my daughter, she's a freshman at Natick High School, I'm like, why is my daughter calling me at noon? And I picked up the phone and she was out of breath, and I'm like, why are you out of breath? She's like, I'm running from the school, there's a shooter. And I totally, I didn't know what to do. I was like, what do you mean there's a shooter? She's like, there's a shooter and there's a bomb threat. And I'm running, and I'm like, well, you're supposed to be on lockdown. Why are you running from the school? And she's like, there was so much confusion, Mom. The library teacher told us to go out on the field, and everybody's running. The Natick police showed up within like minutes. There was no active shooter, but somebody had hacked. This is all what I'm hearing. Somebody had gone through a kid's phone and called the Natick police and reported a bomb threat, and that there was a distressed person on the tennis courts with a gun. But I will tell you, it makes me so sad. The world we live in, that our kids and administrators have to live it like that. So Natick High School was on lockdown for like an hour and a half. So really scary, but anyway. So it's a crazy day between that.
So we're happy to be here.
And then driving in that rain here. So can we just exercise for the next 20 minutes? Or somebody pour me a large glass of wine. So anyway, we are very, very happy to be with Attleboro Public Schools. We know you guys have some true superstars here. We're very excited that Blue Cross Blue Shield has partnered with us to support us. They've also supported us in Boston, in Quincy, in Plymouth in the past, out in Holyoke. I mean, Jeff Bellows, in the early days of Box, which was 9 years ago, he was very supportive, and he knew we were onto a good idea of, that kids have adverse childhood experiences and really need an outlet and need to run around and play. So he supported us. So our mission, I'm going to sit down. Sorry. So our mission really is to create a world where every child has an opportunity to play and move around. We know that not only is obesity an issue, but also that mental health is an issue. Right now, teen suicide is up by 70%. I have actually, my background is actually not in this field at all. I was actually a finance person for 20 years, buying non-performing loans in Japan and Scotland. And then I had a cancer diagnosis, so I decided I was going to be a stay-at-home mom, which lasted for about 2 weeks. And I came across the book Spark, written by Dr. John Rady, and was really driven by the fact that, hey, if kids just run around and play for 15 to 20 minutes, I'm sorry, I have my back to you, for 15 to 20 minutes, it has the same effect as taking a little Prozac or Ritalin. So I thought, why don't we provide schools an opportunity? They don't have the resources or the funding right now to provide more PE or more physical activity. Why don't some of these stay-at-home parents show up at school early? Because in Natick, my kids' elementary school didn't start till 9:05, which I was like, what do you do from 5 a.m. till 9? So I had all these kids on my front lawn, so I said, why don't we start a before school program at Memorial Elementary. So with the blessing of the principal and the superintendent, we started Box, which at that time was called Fit Kids Get Up and Go in Natick, and we just thought that we'd have like 50 kids and run a program, and before you know it, everybody was saying, oh, I heard about the program, my kid's sleeping better at night, or I've heard the kids sleep better at night, they're excited to go to school, they're sitting through class. Can we be part of the program? Can we bring it to our community? So what I call word of mom started to spread. And other communities reached out to us for a copy of our curriculum. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm onto something here. Maybe I should form a nonprofit. So I reached out to Dr. Rady because his email's in his book, and I said, Dr. Rady, I've started this program based on your book, and I was wondering if I form a nonprofit, if you would be willing to advise me or talk to me. I never thought in a million years that he'd email me back. And like 20 minutes later, I get ping. He's like, not only will I advise you, I'd like to be one of your directors. And I thought, oh shoot, now I really have to form a nonprofit. So we formed the nonprofit, and we started to build this curriculum and get some expertise in helping us build it through the American Heart Association, through NASPE, which was SHAPE at the time. And then I went to Reebok on a Friday afternoon asking for some t-shirts or trinkets, and the CEO told me he'd give me 10 minutes of his time. And I showed him a little video from my flip phone of what we were doing. And he said, you know, we love what you're doing because we believe that the sporting goods industry has failed as a whole and has created this culture of spectators, and we need to create a culture of participants. So why don't we bring you in-house and really help you grow this program? So we went in-house to Reebok and got a number of other sponsors, including Blue Cross from Jeff Bellows, who drank the Kool-Aid early on. And we put together a curriculum that we feel is very easy to use, and it can be run by a parent, a nurse, a PE teacher, a YMCA member, a Boys and Girls Club member. And we also have found that, you know, it's very important to prove that there's evidence behind what we're doing. So we partnered with Mass General Hospital and Harvard Medical School, and also we've done programs with NIAST, which is National Institute on Out of School Time, on proving the benefits of physical activity for kids. And so we found that when we followed these kids, we saw a decrease in BMI, and decrease in depression and anxiety, and increase in cognitive functioning and executive functioning. So with that, we are trying our best to bring box to as many schools as possible. The majority of our schools are run by parent volunteers. So out of the 4,200 that have enrolled, the majority are run by parents who just want to bring it to their kids' school. It's a great way for parents to be involved with their kids for an hour. And we've actually, you know, the side effect here is we've seen a lot of parents get in shape. And we've also heard stories about, you know, some trainers who hated PE class because of how they were treated, or they didn't like, you know, their experience because they could never be a sports person. But this has allowed them to not only get them involved, but get their kid involved in an early activity that allows them to learn love movement, because we know that kids learn their habits by age 8. So if we can give them the opportunity to move, it's going to help them, it's going to help the teachers, it's going to help the administrators. So we're excited to, Christine's pushing me along. That's why she talks. She's like, come on, Gary. That's why I don't sit closer to me, because then she kicks me. So we are excited to partner with Blue Cross and fund your 5 elementary schools. And we just thank you for your partnership. And we can't wait to see the success this has on your kids and your community.
So, and just to bring to your attention, this photo here is from Peter Thatcher this year, who's been running a volunteer-based program for the last 6 years through Lisa Kilfoyle behind us. So she, hopefully the district will lean into her. She's an expert at running box and has a team of committed volunteers and trainers with her. So that's a great example, and truly runs a model program where it's school staff and parents, very community-driven. So we're super excited to just bring everybody in and have Lisa here to really show the way.
And I have to say, Lisa, I mean, I have to come see your program soon, because everybody raves about you and your program. So you're a huge asset to this community. Thank you.
Oops. So just some little quotes, which are in a press release, which I sent to Lori, and we'll send that out tomorrow to officially announce the partnership going forward. That's really it. I mean, I don't want to read slides to you. I think that's boring. But does anybody have any questions about the program? Or
Mr. Storrs?
Yeah, thank you for being here. First, I want to say I went on your website. Every question I had was able to be answered by the website. I thought that was great. The whole question and answer section of your website was awesome. So thank you for that. I saw that the program is focused, at least for right now, mainly on preschool, before the school. But so I was wondering, for Attleboro, are we looking before the school or after the school, program-wise?
So I believe we're going to run before school on all
Okay.
5.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the other one, I saw the different types of programs. I think like 4 were like intramural style, and then the other ones were more supportive, like the yoga and what have you. Do
So-
we know what we're looking to do here?
Elementary schools will start off with functional fitness programming, so teaching traditional functional fitness skills, so your sit-ups, your squats, your push-ups, all of that. As it progresses, the school has the option to continue with that same curriculum. We also have a fundamental curriculum as well, so that's your striking, your throwing, getting kids ready for sports later on. Yoga is a supplement to the existing curriculum. It's not a full 12-week curriculum, but it's just, some little additional pieces that can be blended into the existing.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I
Ms.
also
Regan
did
here?
want to mention that Miss Denise Levesque from Hyman Fine and Tom Silver from Willett are here. They are going to be facilitators moving forward next year, and we invited them to come. So
Great.
we'll have facilitators in all 5 schools.
That's great. Mr. Quinn?
This is the second program that's come through in the last couple of meetings that where outside companies have come in and we've been fortunate to receive it. I think just from our standpoint, this is something that we want to keep going. So whatever you're putting into it, if we can just be kept up to date to what that's going to be to sustain it, because we want to make sure it keeps going. I'm sure the demand's going to be high enough that we don't have any choice, but just the committee knows that we can allocate the needed funds. So we thank you for the 2 years investment. We want to just demonstrate that we're committed to making this, well beyond the 2 years. So thank you.
That's awesome. And we encourage you all to come and visit a program when they're up and running in the fall, too. I think the proof is in the pudding. So when you come and you play games with our kids and just have a good time. I
Yeah,
think it'll be-
you have to play with them.
Yeah, you do. We have
It's
great
really
games.
fun. Yeah.
Toilet tag is a big favorite. We'll explain it when you're there.
And I will tell you, there's other, if you want to speak directly, like Jen Whipple, who's on our board of advisors, is the superintendent of Weymouth Public Schools. Like, she's a huge advocate. So if you ever want to speak to somebody directly that's, already running the program with many different variations. She does, one of her schools does it at 0 hour. They do box first with 3 to 5 minute activity breaks throughout the day. So happy to put you in touch with them. Also in Peabody, they're starting to incorporate box into their IEPs for their children that are on the autism spectrum disorder, because they're seeing a huge difference in those kids in their classroom behavior after. So
Mrs. Stewart?
One of the other things that it just occurred to me that I was reading was how the program is for, I believe it was K through 8, but in this case for our elementary, it's K through 4. Is that correct?
yes.
Could you speak, I read it, but I think it's worth getting out there, how, because I'm sure there could be concerns about the age difference between kindergarten all the way up to 4th. Your website again went over it, but I think it'd be worth like talking about it a little bit.
Yeah, so we've actually found great success in combining the ages. And it's funny, early on we had folks from NASB or SHAPE come and look at us and say, what are you doing combining ages? And then they saw that it actually works really well, because the older kids act as mentors and they start to feel good about being junior coaches. Sometimes they'll help with the class, sometimes they'll deliver the nutrition bits. And the younger kids have an opportunity to look up to these kids. So it actually creates something where they have somebody they can high five in the hallway that they know from this group. And so they kind of create this family community. So there are some schools that I go to and they still keep the K and 1s together, and then they keep the older. Sometimes it makes me sad for the kids, because I see all the success of combining the grades. It's really great, like when you can, and you can give the older kids some responsibilities as well.
Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for your commitment to Attleboro Public Schools and other schools. It's a great program, and look forward to seeing and hearing more about it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yes, and we do have some little T-shirts for all of you, so you can
Uh-huh.
wear it with some of the
I guess the one thing I would just add real quick. From the Blue Cross perspective, is just thanks for giving us this opportunity to partner with you guys. We get really excited working with Vox. As Kathleen mentioned, we've worked with them in other communities and just really seen what it's able to do. And we love the idea of being able to bring it to all the elementary schools. And so we're just really excited to be in touch and connected this way over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us all here tonight and bringing us into your committee meeting. I know you have official business to take care of. We're just excited to be here and really talk about our partnership. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll leave this here and then we can sort.
I'm gonna drive home and have a glass of wine.
Feel free to come to Thatcher Tuesday or Thursday mornings.
Maybe Dave wants to be in.
All right, next we have our Student Advisory Council and around Attleboro update. For that, we'll turn it over to Ms. Larson.
Thank you. All right. So on April 25th, Thatcher's going to have their community reading day. So if any of you are going, I hope you have fun. And then over at the middle schools, the 5th graders are going to start their STEP challenge. And then the 8th grade students are going to be visiting the high school. So Brennan will go April 24th, Wamsutta will go April 25th, and Coella will go April 26th. And then Brennan's going to have a talent show on April 24th. At the high school, AP exams begin on May 6th. So, yeah. Lots of coffee, lots of everything, but for community engagement, we have a few things going on. The ACE PAC Awards are going to be on April 25th. Those will be here at the high school. Elks Youth Appreciation Night will be May 2nd, and then Special Olympics is May 3rd. That's during the day. Everyone's welcome to come stop by. You can either watch the competition side or you can come to Olympic Town. That's where I'll be, so if you want to get your face painted or anything. But yeah, we're hoping for good weather, so. And then for SAC update, the fencing has gone up as part of the preparation for the new high school, so it's pretty exciting.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. Next, we have the superintendent's report and business agenda. Since Superintendent Sawyer is still having his picture taken, I believe, I will. I'll skip ahead to the proposed school committee meeting schedule from July 2019 to August 2020. The proposed schedule was circulated with your packets. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
We also have the proposed subcommittee meeting schedule from July 2019 through August, it's actually from June 2019 through August 2020. The proposed schedule was circulated with your packets. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. We will wait patiently for Mr. Sawyer to come back. Mr. Furtado, I assume you can join us at the table since the first item on his agenda is the budget. I'm going to, while we're still waiting here, move down again in the agenda to the minutes from our April 1st, 2019 meeting. The minutes were circulated with your packet. We have a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. All right, and we'll move it back up to the superintendent's report. Mrs. Sawyer, the schedules for next year have been approved.
Oh.
I left the rest up to you.
My apologies. Wanted to make sure to thank the generosity of our partners. I just have a couple brief updates for you today. With the vacation in between our last meeting, not too much to report on, but a couple things. One, I wanted to wish you all a happy Earth Day. I think that it's an important moment to note that as we're asking students to become more civically engaged and to have more authentic and real-world projects to show their understanding, I am becoming more involved with those things as they start to have reach beyond the classroom walls and have an impact on how their schools are being run and how they want to have an influence on their community. And one of the themes that's emerging from that work is their concern for the environment, that the world that they're going to inherit. And I think that it's a cause for hope for me personally, that our kids take this seriously, and it's less of a political issue for them and more of one that is just a concern about the world that they're going to inhabit. And I'm impressed by their commitment and many of the ideas they have about how to make the world a better place, and by their focus on local issues, things that they can have influence on and control. And so, as we talk about, changing the way we offer our learning experiences, this is an area that it's really emerging, and something that I think we should all be excited about. So, just a good tie-in to Earth Day. I wanted to update you all that I met with the mayor this morning as we continue to work through our planning for both FY19 and FY20 and closing out FY19. Last time we met, we did discuss the carryover funds and undirected funds from FY18 that we have not received yet. And I just wanted to report that we have resolved that and expect to be receiving that money from the city in the next week or so. Is that an accurate timeline?
Propose it to the council on the 7th.
On the 7th. So that's it's been taken care of, and so I think we can cross that off the list of concerns. The final thing I have for you is a project update. If anyone's driven by, you'll notice the fencing is up. What's the fancy term they use for that? Mobilization? What's it?
Mobilization is on. Yeah, we're ready to go.
Yeah, I still don't quite understand that word, but I do know what mobilization means. I just what putting up fences means. But anyways, exciting. I mean, this has become very real for us, and if you come and happen to be in the area, you'll see that. The other thing I would mention is that we do now have a Facebook page and a website, a page on our website devoted to updates on the project. This weekend that went live and swept like wildfire through the social media world. Quite a few people have signed up, and hopefully more will do as well as we update people on what they can expect in terms of the project through that service. So keep you posted. Okay, so that's it for updates. Our business for today is to circle back to our discussion about FY20. There are no facts that have changed since our presentation last week, so really I think it's time for a discussion about what you would like to see us put together for the budget request that you'll be approving and sending to the mayor 2 weeks from today, which would be
Before we start down that path, I just had a quick question about the carryover funds. I watched part of the council meeting. I don't know if I just missed one. Were there two different carryover funding amounts? There were, because I thought I saw one had been introduced. I didn't know if both.
There are two amounts that should be coming back to the school district. One is we have to do a whole bunch of estimates in June and encumber funds for bills we anticipate to come, some utility bills and things like that. As those bills come in and they close those encumbrances, sometimes it returns money. In this case, it returned about $75,000. So those funds, the city auditor has sent a memo to the mayor and the council identifying those funds and requesting they be returned to the school. Those are funds that we report into the state of Massachusetts through our end-of-year report as expended, because there are estimates for the end-of-the-year costs. So that's one pool of money. That was a little over $75,000. The second pool is a carryover, which is when the city does its audit at the in the fall, and the auditors certify free cash. Part of that certification is an identification of funds unexpended by the schools. Again, those are net school spending dollars, and historically have always been returned to the schools. So that amount was just a little over $86,000. We went to municipal council 4 times from August through February, requesting authority to pay prior year expenditures for invoices that came in very late or were lost or those sorts of things, and that was about $14,000. So that 14 will come off of the 86, leaving us with about 72 plus the 75 that from the encumbrances. I am assuming at some point soon those funds will be provided to us.
Okay, thank you. Because I think I just thought one set was voted out of a committee. I didn't see the other one, so I just was trying to confirm what the total expenditures we were expecting, and or not expenditures, but funds, and you confirmed that for me, so thank you.
So in the same discussion, I know last time we talked about how historically we'd never received those funds anything later than, say, December.
Right.
Was any indication provided why it's taken as long as it has?
None provided to me, no.
Same.
No, I just, we didn't express any sort of urgency, and therefore it just, they're getting to it now. The concerns that were raised at our last meeting, I did bring those up, and I think that's why we're seeing it now, because there wasn't any sort of reason for it, it just hadn't been done.
So going forward, we probably want to raise this earlier in the year is what we're saying.
Yeah, if there's a concern, an easy way to resolve that is to ask for a certain, yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so following up on the next item, Superintendent Sawyer raise, which is the fiscal year 20 proposed budget. I think our job tonight is to approve a proposed budget to have submitted to the mayor. So far, the administration has provided us with 3 proposed budget amounts, which one was level serviced, one was a so-called urgent needs budget, which was level service plus the most urgent needs in the district to really get us through with Band-Aids, and then the educational needs budget, which is the budget we've been talking about for years now, which is where we really need to be to provide the education our students are entitled to, and that's the number, that's in round numbers about $10 million above level services. There's also a 4th proposed budget amount, and that's the amount that we believe the city has proposed, or actually the administration has proposed, which came in under level service. So, you know, what would be one of those 4 proposed budgets we would be approving tonight, or it could be a different amount. But I guess I would open it up to the floor for discussion or motions at this time. Mr. Scales.
I would like to make a motion to put forth the urgent needs budget for approval.
Second.
Okay. Motion's been seconded. Any discussion, comments?
Could you give us specifically the bottom line on that?
Yeah, specific, the dollar number for this urgent needs budget?
Sure. It would be 79 million, $598,460.
For comparison's sake, what would level service be?
78,676,460.
discussion, comments? Mr. Quinn?
Yeah, just to recap for our audience, the urgent needs, can you talk a little bit about what that investment would go to and the impact that would have on the student experience and the teacher experience here in Attleboro Public Schools?
Do you want to do that? You want me to do that?
I think Ms. Regan would be best suited to give us a summary of that.
So the urgent needs fall directly in line with our learning priorities, looking specifically at class sizes. It would be to reduce the number of students that are in each class at the elementary level and specifically at the middle school level. Also to provide supports for social emotional learning, including adjustment counselors and providing students with more opportunities throughout the day to receive services. The other need was directly connected to intervention or inclusive practices services for our ELL students as well as some of our special education students that are coming in specifically with ELL with no English. They're newcomer students and students who have SLIFE or interrupted formal education. So those are two areas or two programming areas where we're in significant need of services for those populations of students. And then finally, the last one was integration of technology and supporting the integration of our one-to-one program in grades 5 and 9 throughout the district. That's just a broad highlight of the urgent needs.
With the urgent needs, and you said that those are based off the educational priorities, and just to refresh everyone's memory, how are those educational priorities arrived at?
So we have our district learning priorities, which focus on personalization of learning, experiential learning, infusion of technology, and those have been behind all of our decision making for all of the budgets that we've had since we've had the learning priorities. And then when we presented our budget to you in December, we had listed out 3 specific priorities, and one was staff. That is consistent, the number 1 priority that many of our educators and administration alike have stated as their number 1 priority. Number 2 was inclusive practices, including support for our special education students and our ELL population. And the third one was infusion of technology. So we were consistent in really using those priorities as the driving factors to make those decisions.
Thank you. Mr. Quinn?
And Assistant Superintendent Regan, can you talk a little bit about the realities in terms of access to social emotional resources for our students right now? Do we have adjustment counselors in every building? And if so, how many adjustment counselors are serving per student?
So we have adjustment counselors in the building. There is about 1 to, depending on the needs and the programs that are in each building, there's about 1 to 2 in each building. Do we need significantly more?
So 1 for about every 400 or 500 kids?
Correct.
Okay. And so the other piece of this too, just to kind of follow up, is that we also have classrooms filled with diverse learners with diverse learning needs. Is that correct?
Correct.
Many coming from different areas of the country, if not the world, with various special needs. Is that correct?
Correct.
And we've focused on this, but we still have relatively high class sizes in elementary, although we're targeting to bring those down.
Yes.
Correct. So what this targeted service would achieve, actually 2 goals here. So we're reducing the class sizes in our elementary to provide more individualized students to the existing students in the classroom.
Right.
But also with the budget would be targeted at our students who are most needy, who are most vulnerable, to provide them the added resources that they need that would also benefit the existing students in the classroom.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. I just want to make sure I was understanding. So
So looking at the 2 budgets, if we look at the net school, I know it's hard to do because from elementary school to elementary school and middle to middle, things vary, but generally, we're talking teacher to student ratio. I know right now, is it safe to say anywhere between 25 to 30 students out in elementary school? I know contractually it's 28, but I know there's times where we can go over and additional cost is associated with that. Is that a rough estimate, 25 to 30, somewhere in there?
It depends where you are in the city at the elementary
Right.
level, but yeah, we monitor the enrollment across the district and try to move teachers throughout the district so that we can keep the class sizes lower than 30. We try to cap it at 28 as much as we can.
And if we did have an urgent needs budget, that would definitely be one of the places that would be impacted. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Could you give us an estimate of, from, say, 25 to 30, would it now go to like 20 to 25? Trying to put some relative terms, student to teacher ratio it matters, so the class sizes is a big part of what we can do for our students.
Yeah.
So could you maybe try to put a little bit around that?
At the elementary level, if we were able to provide support, and also at the middle school level, right now we have, at the middle school level specifically, we have some class sizes that are exceeding 28, and we would certainly need to hire more teachers to reduce that class size. And middle school is one area that we definitely need to provide more resources to support the needs of students specifically at that level, because our students are demonstrating a need for more support. They're coming in as newcomers without any language at all. Some of our special education classes, because the class sizes are so high, the students are not getting the specific needs and the specific support that they need to be able to reach their goals in their individualized education plans. So if we had smaller class sizes, as you mentioned, specifically at the middle school level, then we would be able to address the needs of our general education population, our special education population, our ELL population, so that all the needs of all of our students are met.
And the reason I wanted to bring that up is, even though it's in the name of the budget, urgent needs, this is not, shouldn't be pie in the sky kind of stuff. This should be what we at a minimum are doing. And unfortunately, year after year, we haven't been able to get there. So I totally support the idea of the urgent needs budget being sent up because of this exact discussion here.
Mr. Geddes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Scales, for bringing, this was the only budget option I was willing to support, and even that was reluctant. Because since our big issues back in 2016, I think we've filled most, if not all, of the positions that were lost in that series of layoffs, correct? Approximately? I think we lost about 35 folks across the district.
That was the starting place. I'm not sure that we've quite gathered them all back.
Okay, but we're close to it.
We've slowly tried to increase, but there are still some holes.
Right. I think I wasn't at the last meeting, but I was glad to hear a lot of the concerns that were voiced. I was especially grateful to Mr. Domenici and Ms. Sawyer, who's not here tonight, for asking about where exactly the cuts were suggested by the city, because that was something I was especially interested in. And I know the mayor had said to the Sun Chronicle that none of it was going to impact education, that it was about budget, not education. But a proposed cut of $300,000 for special education tuition that is state mandated, nearly $60,000 in textbook and supply cuts, various about $20,000 in cuts to substitution budget line items, which are already on a year-to-year basis are very tight. As Regan mentioned, the additional supports for adjustment counselors. I heard from a lot of families earlier this year about the need, and Charlie Johnson Kiff, an AHS senior, started a petition to ask Mr. Sawyer to add at least a guidance counselor to the high school. The urgent needs are really, they're just that. They're what we need. We can't survive cuts, and we can't start cutting it. We can't start going back to the city every time we need some additional money that they didn't give us up front. That hasn't worked out for us in the past. That wound up happening to us this year. And the response to unexpected special education costs were, maybe the mayor should become chairman of the school committee. And that's not, that a few years ago, transportation costs were cut during this time of year. And then we ran short of transportation, had to ask the city for money, and the accusation was, it was before most of us were on the committee, but the accusation was that the school committee wasn't handling their money properly. So I think I think anything less than the urgent needs is setting the entire district up for failure down the road. So thank you for making that motion.
Mr. Quinn and then Mr. Storrs.
I got a couple questions for
Mr. Furtado, and Mr. Furtado, thank you for answering some of my questions previously. I've got a couple questions in relation to the foundation budget. So the foundation budget estimates that our employee benefits and fixed charges are about 8.8 million. Is that reflective of what our actual costs are?
No, it's well above that, almost $5 million.
So we got a $5 million deficit there, and then it estimates our special education tuition is about $1.3 million. Is that accurate in terms of?
No, that's off by about $2 million.
Okay, so we're starting off with about a deficit of $6 million just before we even get out of the gate. So I think one of the things, just kind of run down a couple of the other ones. So administration, the foundation budget estimates that we should be spending about $3.4 million. That's just for central office, school committee. That's about $2 million, give or take.
Yep.
So we got a 1.2 delta, and even so, actually 1.3. There's some things not included in there, but the rest of those items don't add up to 1.3 million, I would venture a guess. So we're underspending on administration.
Dramatically.
Same for instructional leadership. So building principals, the foundation budget estimates that we should spend about 1.5. The actual's 3.5.
5 million. It's actually 3.5. Yeah.
Yep. And then Mrs. Regan.
Just to clarify, $1.5 million less we're spending?
Yes.
Than, okay.
So I'm just trying to point out the impact. Assistant Superintendent Regan, it says that we should be spending about, let me see here, professional development, super important, 1.3 million. You getting close to 1.3 million in professional development? Okay. And then instructional equipment and technology, again, I'll leave this to the two of you. 4.3 million. Are we spending 4.3 million on instructional technology and supplies? No. Okay.
About $3.5 million short of that.
Okay. And then, we have some other teaching services that we have to provide. It estimates about 6.4 million. About half that. Okay. So already out of the gate, we're in the hole just out of these two line items.
Double-digit million.
So I think it points to the importance of the Foundation Budget Review Commission getting fixed, but it also points to that a lot of these urgent needs, what the state estimates that we're spending on just the basics, we're not able to hit. So I think even, I think there's some well-intentioned folks who are trying to find ways to get to a number that seems reasonable from their perspective. But I think it's worth pointing out that we're already underfunded in these line items by 50% or more. So I think the urgent needs budget, just in the context of what the state estimates and the underestimations, is reasonable just on its face. I got some other things I want to bring up later, but I'll yield the floor to the rest of my colleagues.
Mr. Storrs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two quick things. So, first of all, to Mr. Guest, thank you for bringing up, what was put into the paper. Mr. Furtado, you and I talked about this after the meeting last time about how the different recommendations for where we should be cutting our budget, how one of it was $300,000 from special education tuitions. And what you and I talked about is the number of students is no. In fact, the current number of students that we have is, as of right now, the same number of students that we're going to have next year. That obviously anything can change over the summer. Students could leave, but more often than not, they don't leave. They come in, and we've seen that issue in the past. But we have to base our budget on what we know, and what we know is this is what the number is this year. None of those students are leaving. That is the number next year. And the cost of the programs that we have to send these students to, that's known.
Right.
So your budget line was based on two known things. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
So the fact that we were being told or recommended to actually cut $300,000 from a line that is based on reality didn't make any sense to me. And then the fact that it went into the paper saying it wasn't educationally related kind of bothered me, since it was it almost seemed like it was pointed at me for bringing this up during the last meeting. So thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Geddes. On the other side of it, I know that we are 3.5 weeks away from having to make notices, take action based on contractual obligations. If indeed it looks like we're gonna be $750,000 short. Is that a fair statement? I believe by mid-May, we have to do certain things if we have to account for a $750,000 shortfall.
If we follow the suggested cuts, we have a shortfall of about $250,000. The House budget has come out, and that augmented Chapter 70 funding by about 125, so about half of that. So depending on how the foundation budget, I don't think will increase. I think it's simply an increase in the grant, the Chapter 70 grant. So if the city holds on its current funding commitment, that would close the gap by about half, and we'd have a $125,000 problem to solve, but that includes the suggested cuts.
Right, which I'm not sure that this group has even
Right.
thought about agreeing to all of those suggested cuts, especially since, as we just talked a moment ago, $300,000 in tuitions
Yep.
is not even reality. But it sounds like what you're saying is that the formula has changed in a way that $300,000 would now be reduced. Is that correct?
The 250, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's a little bit better than it was. But ultimately, I mean, my point I'm getting at is, I know right now we're a little early in the process. This is about setting up a budget to City Hall. But we're only a few weeks away from having to do certain things if indeed it looks like we are going to have the gap that it looks like we are. So that's a fair statement, correct?
Yep.
Mr. Domenici, then Mr. Geddes?
Thank you. And I got a few places to go, so I'm going to try to be as succinct as I can be. I always appreciate Mr. Quinn when you pull up the numbers, because it does tell the story. The thing that I would mention, though, is, as you mentioned, the foundation budget is broken, and it's going to have to be the state versus the city that can fix it. And that's probably what you'll hear from a lot of folks, that the city is doing what it can. Now, not even providing a level services budget, I don't think I agree with that personally. That, I think they should at least do that. But we're not going to get those fixes unless the state steps up, whether it's the Promise Act, whether the House bill could eventually find its way to providing more funding. So I guess my questions, and I'm not discounting the fact that there's what we call level service is what we're saying, this is what we gave this year, and in order to do this for next year, we need this. And that number is not addressing any of the true needs. So it's sometimes I find it hard to equate that, is the urgent needs budget really urgent needs? Is it level service for what we truly know? So that's where I get conflicted, because at the same time, we already know we have a $600,000 difference between what the city says it can pay us and what our level services funding is. Is it a statement, that we say, well, we really need the urgent needs? So now we're talking, we have a $1.6 million gap. I don't know that, the city's not going to fund that. As it is, I think we have a battle to try to fund a level services budget. And I'm not suggesting that we as a committee should just, I guess, settle for mediocrity or the level limits. I don't know how we want to put it. It probably won't play out well no matter how I try to say it. But I'm wondering about the real, is it realistic? Is it going to really truly be heard? And then my other question to that would be, is there, to the committee, the administration, should we get a miracle from the state, right? Would that then increase what we would consider our Chapter 70 formula? So that it's not a case of, oh, well, you've got this extra money now from the state, you can have level services, we don't have to give as much of a city commitment. I wonder about those types of questions. For how this
two
works.
things. First of all, I think your first question is very important. I don't think people appreciate how organic a school district is, and how the needs change over the course of the year. We don't have a static condition.
Right.
We have students who develop needs. We have students who move in with needs. We have students who enroll. So when we say the urgent needs budget, that's a reflection of what we need to do to serve the students we have. We know through current enrollment data that we are oversubscribed in areas, and we need teachers to reduce those class sizes. We know that there are special needs classrooms that are not being as successful as they could be because they don't have the support. So we know we have to provide those supports. As Assistant Superintendent Reagan said, we know we have ELL students, again, that are not being supported as much as they should be and need to be by regulation. This isn't us trying to be benevolent. This is a regulation that we're supposed to follow. So that first part is it's gets a little blurry because the urgent needs budget reflects our current condition and deficiencies that we know exist. The second part of the question is terribly relevant, even if there is no miracle, because again, how the city handles the increase in the House budget is important. That did not change the foundation formula. Our foundation budget will not change. The grant increased. There may be, as a result, an offset in local contribution, which means a reduction in city funding. Now, if the city subscribes to that, our problem is still the same.
Yeah, that's where I was headed.
So, but I don't know what their dispensation would be.
And then I just have one last point, and then I'll cede the floor, is, based on what we read, the decisions made by the administration were to prevent any layoffs anywhere, so to speak, from their point of view. And I don't know if this is where you were headed at all, Mr. Storrs, with decisions we have to make.
Yeah, partial. Yep.
But is that, can I just put that out there? If what the city is stating they could provide, and we still have to solve that problem, does that problem include the potential of going down that path again?
If you're asking if
Basically,
the number that the city is planning to allocate, does that equal layoffs for us?
Yes.
Is that the question? The answer to that is no.
okay.
Right? It's the mayor's priority to not have any layoffs, and that includes the school department.
Does it include a loss of positions? But
No.
not filling positions, no?
No. So there aren't cuts to the suggested cuts are in places where, and some of those suggested cuts, we would be actually spending less than what we would anticipate. And other places, it would be things where we would be hoping to have a better year than there's any good reason to believe that we necessarily would. But they do fluctuate. I mean, depending on people coming and going, there are years in which they work out and years where they don't. So the cuts are into places where there is less of a certainty in terms of what the number is going to be, which, scarily enough can work out either way. But the cuts are not to our personnel lines, right? So the money's in the lines that we need to run level services in terms of staffing. And that was the strategy in the suggested cuts. But I would just like to clarify, we talk about a level services budget, and that's just trying our best to compare apples to apples, which you really can't do because no 2 years are exactly the same no matter what you do. So it's a bit of a fudge, but we do our best to try to say what does what we're doing right now cost next year, even though next year is going to be different, and that gives you that level service number. But first of all, current services are inadequate, right? We know that we do not have adequate funding to meet the needs of the kids that are in front of us currently, right? That's been the case for quite some time and is going to be continue to be the case until a significant change happens, whether at the state level, the local level, or a combination of the two, right? That $11 million roughly number that we talk about, that represents adequate funding, right? Our urgent needs budget represents, we're inadequate, and we're critically inadequate. And we know that there are specific areas where we have students that we currently have who have needs that, you know, we're not going to be able to fulfill in a way that we're comfortable with, and that's why we're saying that we need these other things, you know, as that urgent need budget. But even the urgent needs budget will leave us in a place in which we are funded inadequately, right? So that's the great picture. Like, you know, we talk about level services because I think it is an important number to try to calculate, just because the cost of running the district goes up from year to year. So level services is our way of gauging, you know, how much does it just cost, does the cost go up? But the fact of the matter is that the needs go up. And by the way, I remind us all that the expectations under accountability go up year after year. And we as a district have, over the last decade, basically not kept up with level services. You know, we've had a couple good years over that span, but in most years, we've been funded below level services. And so that means that we have been shaving away at precisely the same time that the requirements for us to meet academically in terms of achievement have gone continuously up, right? So while the expectations for us continue to rise, our funding has gone up, but not even at a level to keep the services that we had 10 years ago in place. And so there's a cumulative effect of this over time. And, you know, as I tried to explain to the community in my guest essay in the Sun Chronicle, just as we went into vacation, I tried to explain, you know, we're reaching that point at which this becomes a crisis. We're not there yet, but at some point this all catches up with us. And the problems that we're having in this particular fiscal year, I think, you know, should be a strong indication to everyone that something is going to have to change very soon, or we will get to a place where this becomes unsustainable.
Mr. Larson?
I'd like to just point out a couple things just to the general public so they're aware of it. But one of the things that the mayor's allowed to do is reduce our budget to provide a payroll to the school department. The mayor's also allowed to, through the regulations, to charge us for water and sewer on an annual basis. These charges, I don't believe, are charged to any of the other 21 departments in the city. It's primarily just the school district that gets these charges. So from a low-hanging fruit point of view, there's something there, I think, that could be reevaluated. And I think it's incredibly important for the public to realize there's one individual in Attleboro who will decide what the school district's budget is, and it's whoever happens to be the mayor. And so, I mean, these are great conversations, and we have to have these conversations to educate the public. But the public needs to know, at the end of the day, where that number is going to come from. Thank you.
Mr. McGinnis?
Thank you. Going back to Mr. Domenici and Mr. Storrs, one of the things that they asked for was where there was cuts, and like I said, thank you for the memo that detailed that. In looking at this, the textbook supplies, if we don't get that money, we go without textbooks. Legal services, that was based on the fact that this is a contract year. And so some of this other stuff, we go without. But going back to $300,000 in special education, $100,000 in transportation requirements, that's $400,000. So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think where Mr. Storrs and Mr. Domenici were trying to go is if $400,000 are being cut from lines that we know we have to pay, and so where else in our budget would we come up with that $400,000? And are we sure that will not result in any staff shortages? Is that where you two are going with that? Or?
Absolutely.
We could not recover $400,000 in our budget.
So there is no fluff,
No.
so to speak. Okay. And along those lines, I mentioned the legal budget line. I didn't print the whole packet, but as I looked through it where the cuts came from, the proposed amounts were, for the most part, based on last year or previous similar years' costs.
Sort of.
For the most, so, so with the legal fees, last year was, I think, 70,000, give or take.
We, for 19, we budgeted 70,000, and therefore, that's the number they chose. The prior years were around $85,000.
Right, right, because 17 was the last contract year, which I think we had budgeted 100, spent 85, but some of that, because contracts negotiations continued, rather than continuing to be at 70 for the next, so the 30,000 for the contract negotiations was there, just went over 2 years.
Yep.
So was there any rationale given to why in those lines where we were spending up to what was budgeted, or in some cases over what was budgeted, why that would be cut back?
No, they just felt that they diligently worked over the budget lines, and based on 19 budget and performance both this year and historically, that those were the numbers that were reasonable.
Thank you.
Mrs. Scales?
Just going to what Mr. Geddes was talking about, the textbook and supplies line for close to 60,000. We already authorized you to not spend 20,000 in those lines for this year, and that part of the 100,000.
Right.
So I'm wondering if there are any other departments in the city who have been asked to cut 100,000 from their lines like we have. So yes, I can't imagine, we're already not spending 20,000 and now we're not going to spend another 60,000. That's just crazy talk.
Mrs. Storrs?
Thank you. Yeah, before I get into the next point, I do want to say, this discussion that we're having right now is why I believe so strongly that this body needs to be independent. You know, when you have a $70 million budget, which just goes up and up year after year.
Almost 80 now.
When you have a city this size, you know, it needs to be an independent group. That's why I like the format that our city charter has, and I would totally oppose a change that has been presented out in the ether. But beyond that, to Mr. Geddes' point, you just said there's no way we can recover from a $500,000. By the contractual requirements, we have to take a certain action by the mid-May in case we have to do something. Obviously, we don't want to do something. Obviously, we hope that things change between then and when the budget gets approved. But this group can't go on this hopes. I love the idea that somebody in City Hall is saying, let's not do this and let's cut from here, 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 and here. But that's not that person's decision. That is this governing body's decision, and it's not a decision we take for granted. You know, this is important. $500,000. Something has to get cut. Level service becomes less than level service when you have that much of a deficit. Am I speaking right?
Well, I think the context changed a little.
200.
Well, no, in the sense that we were told that we then would have access to free cash in the fall for areas where the funding was insufficient. That's never been the case, and you know, as this discussion is going on, it's absolutely correct to say, how would you recover from that sort of deficit in your budget? And so historically, that would have to have been the answer. You have to recover from that deficit within your budget, and I can assure you that we do not have the ability to do that in the 20 proposed budget. But the kind of change would be having access to free cash.
But free cash, follow up, free cash should never be used for operating costs. And what I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is there's a recommendation for us to approve a budget that we know is not going to meet the operating needs of this district over the course of a school year.
Yes.
I'm sorry, that makes absolutely no sense to me. How can we approve a budget that we know isn't going to meet the needs of our students and our staff and what we're providing over the course of a school year in the hopes that maybe somebody might give us something down the road, which that's beyond problematic to me.
Mr. Domenici?
Thank you, and thank you, Mark, because I had meant to follow down that path, because it was my understanding that part of, and it might have answered my question when I asked you about the potential decisions in May. It's because the idea was that, if I get this right, they were recommended or suggested cuts in the event that if we really needed the money, like every other department, right, we would have to go in front of the city and ask for the funds and then get it approved by council. And to your point, Mr. Storrs, which I agree with, you should never use a one-time cash infusion to cover a continuous expense, because you're now just compounding the problem year after year after year. And who's to say that there's always going to be that free cash? Again, I reiterate that I can appreciate, and I certainly, we always talk about wanting to be good members of the community and having an appreciation. You don't want to see anybody in the city lose positions, if that's the position of the administration, that they had to make these decisions the way they do. And we know that we need the state to advocate, and we might finally be getting some traction, but maybe not this year, or maybe a little bit, or maybe it's going to take 5 to 7 years. Even if it's just what the governor is suggesting, it's going to take 7 years, and is it really going to catch up at that point? At the same time, I know we're talking about submitting an urgent needs budget, and though my concerns are that I don't think it's one the city was going to be able to fulfill. I think as a member of this school board, I'd be doing a disservice to students if, we weren't at least trying to at least put it out there that this is what we know the need is. And if we are able to get some additional state funding, then all the better.
Yeah, just real quick in response to Mr. Domenici, because you raised it before, and I think it's a good question, and it's one that I think we grapple with every year, which in presenting a budget is, or proposing a budget is, do we propose what we need, what we really need, or what we think we're going to get? And we really need a budget of about $11 million more than what we're going to get. So why don't we just ask for that? We know we urgently need about $1 million more than level services, and then we know what the city's proposing to give us. In the past, I think the past few years anyway, after bringing this issue to the attention of the community, and getting some increased funding from the city, I think we've been more than patient, good partners in requesting level services or less budgets and receiving less than level service budgets. I think this year, seeing an increase in state funding coming from the state, having cut a lot of our costs that we could down, as we had pledged to do, and seeing commitments the city had made before being seemingly taken back, I think it's, in my opinion, appropriate. This is as appropriate a time as any to say, no, level services isn't enough. It may not be what we get, but we need to send the message that, we have urgent needs and they need to be fulfilled. And I think they can be. I don't think anyone at this table would say that the city can solve our problem and can get us to where we need to be. I don't think anyone has ever said that or would ever say that. It's a question of degree and what they can do. And I think we should ask for urgent needs, and I think that they can find a way to do it. Mr. Quinn?
A couple things, and I think my point is going to tie into yours, Mr. Withers. I think, Mr. Domenici, you stated earlier just the challenge of trying to articulate your point. I think you did a really good job of it, and I appreciate your perspective, as we've had similar conversations. The way that I look at this is that there's things that are beyond our control, and I think the city feels that health insurance piece that weighs like a millstone, and that's like a national concern. And then so my shift in my focus, and I know we're focusing a lot on the 30,000 here, 300,000 there, and I think we're focusing on individual trees when we got a forest. What are the chestnut trees that died off a while ago? We had like a disease that was rotten. But what are we in control of? And one of the items, and we'll talk about it tonight, is we've got a large number of students who could be Attleboro Public School students that are elsewhere. and what can we do to bring those students back in? And I think Assistant Superintendent Regan talked about some of those elementary services, middle school services. That's where the bulk of our students are going out of district. Maybe if we start providing those services, we can start repurposing those funds in. But I also think that we're in a bit of an existential crisis as a city, and I think we've had increases in state funding to the tune of 1.3, 1.7, and 2.3 million the last 2 years. And then some really good new growth years. I think one year was close to 2 million. One year it was 1.3. I think the last year it was about almost $1 million. That's allowed us to put off some really important conversations about what kind of school department do we want. I think it's critical that every community lives within our means. And I think the bigger question is, what are our means? And how do we determine them? And if we determine our means, and this is what our means are, how do we go about changing them if we don't like them? And I think the bigger question, when I look across state, Tracy Novick from MASC put out, what are the districts that have money are spending to the tune of about 33%, 32% above net school spending. For a median, I think that's about $9 million. For a average is about 12. And we got some districts spending like ridiculous amounts of money, so I don't like to use the average. And so I think we have to ask ourselves a critical question about do we want to move more towards the middle of the pack? What would that take to do that, or not? And I think that's a conversation that is coming to a head, because otherwise we're going to keep having these circular conversations. We're a year of enrollment decline from being a net minimum school district, and we're going to be held harmless, and we get that whatever the $50 per kid from the state aid, and now we're back to square one. I called it chutes and ladders in when Representative Hawkins was kind enough to let us speak. And I think we need to have the conversation. I think when this committee and this organization lays out what the needs are, and we articulate clearly, as we've seen in the high school ballot, people are responsive to those needs in a way that I think a lot of people didn't expect. But I think what we may need to do down the road is just ask people, this is what we want to do. This is what we think it's going to cost. Do you support it? Yes or no? I don't think that there's a money tree somewhere where the urgent needs would be an easy lift for the city. But I also do think we need to talk about what is the true capacity of the city, and then put it out to the public so families can make a decision. If you want to live in Attleboro, this is the reality of the funding. But I think we need to start having those questions.
Mrs. Storrs?
My last point is this, when I first started serving like a decade ago, the way this discussion used to be was the superintendent went off, had a conversation behind closed doors, came back, told us what the budget we were going to get was going to be, and that was always what we would send up. I like what this committee and the past committee has been doing, because we're not, continuing to kick that can down the road. We're not looking the other way. Now we actually are looking and coming to real conclusions of what we should be doing minimum, not what we are doing, but what we should be doing minimum. And that's the urgent needs budget that is on the floor right now. In a lot of ways, the conversation right now shouldn't be about $750,000, $600,000, to your point, less than the net school. It should be, should it be urgent, or should it be what we would really want to be doing? Those should be the two budgets that we're discussing, and at a minimum, like Mr. Geddes said, at a minimum, this is the budget that I would support. So that's where I'm at.
Mr. Geddes?
I have a couple more follow-ups, and then I'm going to pivot similarly to what Mr. Quinn said. Were any of because some these were very small chunks, but there were some cuts from principal and administrative lines. Were any of those and professional development? That was the other one. Excuse me. Are any of those contractually obligated funds? In other words, for those on individual contracts, or even for some union contracts, where we're cutting professional development, or we're cutting additional budgets from within the buildings that may be used for professional development funding, Is any of that contractually obligated?
There were funds for building principals that were contractually obligated that were recommended for being cut.
Okay. So that, again, a much smaller chunk, but it goes back to Mr. Storrs' point about there's the reality and then there's the cut from the reality. And in the pivoting point, along the lines of what Mr. Quinn was saying, looking into other ways of finding sources of some additional money. In years past, we have not wanted to become a school choice district because we couldn't, if I remember correctly, we weren't able to put the limitations on it that we wanted. In other words, school choice would have made sense for us if we could bring some students into our vocational programs, but just opening the doors, I mean, we've just spent the last probably 45 minutes talking about how strapped we are in resources and staffing, and so just opening the doors doesn't help that whatsoever unless there is a significant influx. Should we be considering school choice even for that little bit that if it's going to bring in 5,000 per student and we get 10 students, that's a staff member somewhere. So that's another conversation to be had. It's obviously not on our agenda tonight. We haven't formally asked you to to look into that and report back to us on your thoughts as of this year. But maybe that is some added context to that conversation down the road. So I think that's everything I can say.
Mr. Larson?
Well, there's more, but.
And again, just for the public's knowledge, I believe when we started asking you to present, the budget that includes the additional $10 or $11 million, when we did the calculation, correct me if I'm wrong, if we were to receive that money, that would just about bring us to the state average, or we were still going to be just under the state average of
Per pupil.
cost. So just for the general public's knowledge, this number is not, I don't even know what the right number is, but
In
it
Attleboro, we're daring-
basically
we're
brings us
daring
to
dream
average.
to be average.
We would dream to be average,
Yes.
yes.
That's the dream.
That's the dream.
In the per pupil.
In the
not
per,
in
yeah.
any other
No.
way.
Statewide, but
Of course.
I think it's just an important reference for people to understand where we are, what they're getting for their investment, and, the fact that it is not sustainable.
That number would be about 16% above net school spending.
To be
So-
average, just to be average.
Well, so that makes, then you question the net school spending formula, so to speak, because the net school spending formula came out to $77.1 million. When our level services budget was at 78.6. So even just to provide the level of education, so there's a varying degree. We don't talk about net school spending here because it's been some time since we were at net school spending, but to your point, that number is about almost 16% above net school spending. And as you were saying, Mr. Quinn, the well-off communities are spending around 30% above. So for a school district our size, that'd be just over $100 million. And I'm not suggesting we go there. I'm just saying to put numbers in perspective. It's all has to be to scale. A well-off community could have 1/3 the size of our enrollment. So them spending 30% over is less of a push than what it would cost here.
All right, so I think all our points have been made. I'm sure we could go on for hours, but we have a motion seconded on the table to propose to the city or to the mayor's office a fiscal year 2020 budget in the amount of $79,598,460, which is that's correct, which is the so-called urgent needs budget that we had asked the administration to put together. That motion's been seconded. Discussion is complete, so we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Scales?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Right. Thank you all for your comments and consideration on the budget. I know it's a lot of hard work, and a lot of hard work goes into the finance subcommittee meetings as well. There's a lot involved in the budgeting that others may not understand, so appreciate the work everyone puts into it. Anything else, Mr. Sawyer, in your report?
That concludes my report.
Next in the business agenda, the last item of the business agenda is the Special Education Stabilization Fund. Memorandum was provided to you all today, and about setting up a Special Education Stabilization Fund as a reserve fund for unexpected special education costs that may arise during the year, as we've seen happen this year. And I would entertain a motion that pertains strictly to the setting up of such a fund. The motion being that the Attleboro School Committee accepts provisions of Mass General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 13E, for a purpose of establishing and appropriating or transferring money to a reserve fund to be utilized in the upcoming fiscal years to pay, without further appropriation, for unanticipated or unbudgeted costs of special education, out-of-district tuition, or transportation. A copy of which is attached and marked A, Exhibit A.
So moved.
Second.
Just to follow up on something that I said briefly, this motion would be to set up the fund. This does not have anything to do with funding the fund. The school committee, a year and a half ago with the prior administration, created a fiscal sustainability plan that took this idea and put it forward as a good idea. It contemplated funding it from the proceeds from the sales of our surplus buildings. The administration does not want to do that, and in the loan order for the new high school, those proceeds apparently need to go towards paying down the cost. I know there's been some discussion of money, instead of coming to our operating budget, going into this account. That's not something I personally would support at all. I would support setting this up, but this should be funded through, in my opinion, one-time sources of revenue that come in. It should not be robbing Peter to pay Paul, because that's not going to get us anywhere. But that was just my follow-up on the motion. So any other questions? Yes, Mr. Sorensen.
So I just want to reiterate and verify. All we're approving is setting up an account, nothing else.
Correct. And if I mean, as Mr. Larson said before, we don't control what the final number allocated to the schools are. That's essentially decided by one person. But if, the idea or proposal was ever to say, instead of giving you $200,000 or $300,000 for your operating budget, I'm going to put it in this fund, I would say right now, and would say it then, I would adamantly oppose that. So that is not the purpose of this vote by any means. I do think if funded appropriately, this was a good idea, a good resource for the schools for a situation like arose this year and can arise in the future. But it has to be funded appropriately. I wish I had more confidence it would be, but I think we have to have confidence that it'll be done appropriately.
So follow-up. So really, the way I read this, and I want to make sure that it's kind of what everybody else is thinking, if the mayor or whomever put in, say, a couple $100,000 into this account, this account would allow us, as needed, once we go beyond our budget allows, to take those funds via a vote of this governing board and then of the municipal council to take some of that stabilization fund to pay the additional costs. Hopefully, the following year, that would be made whole again to that starting level, so that year after year, we would always have those funds available, so we wouldn't have to have the problems that we've had in the past. Is that kind of how everybody sees this hopefully working?
I mean, that's how this should work.
Okay.
That's the idea behind a stabilization fund like this. So yes, unless you both think
It could even be that a certain amount is added each year, and so that the amount grows over time.
Sure.
Yeah, they do that now with the city stabilization fund.
make a commitment to have a certain amount each year. It's started with Mayor Dumas, Mayor Haro continues it, and so that fund keeps building, if I'm recalling correctly.
Mr. Quinn?
I think the establishment of the fund is critical. I know that there's been a lot of people working on this for quite some time, starting with Mayor Dumas and then Budget Director Lacasse, and then I'm glad to see that Mayor Haro has opened up the door for this. And I know that Mr. Domenici and Councilor Delizio have also been working actively to try to bring it to the council as well. So there's been a lot of effort onto it. I think it's a positive sign that that account's going to be created. I also think it's a positive sign that there's an openness to school access to free cash for additional one-time needs, and I'm encouraged by this trend that provides, or at least the proposals that provide additional resources to the schools that are not going to be coming out of our operating budget or carryover. So I think the fund's critical, and I'm appreciative to all those people who were putting forward the effort to make it a reality.
Mr. Geddes?
Just an additional procedural question to follow up with Mr. Storrs. Any deposits going in or funds coming out also have to be approved by the school committee as well, correct?
No expenditures do. I don't think the school, but my understanding is not that the school committee would have to approve money going into the account.
So,
It's a critical question.
so in that case, would we have the ability to reject an attempt to take carryover funds from the operating budget and put them into this account? In other words, if that is how the administration plans to fund this, in a given year, will we be able to say, no, we need that money for prepaying special ed tuition or whatever else?
So in a year, if you're saying in a year, instead of carryover funds being given to us like they normally have been, they're appropriated to this, I don't think we would have a legal way to prevent it. I think it would be, more of a political advocating, our position on why we think it would be more wise or beneficial to the schools that the funds go where we believe they should go, and hope that we can articulate that in a way that the administration or whoever was proposing to put it in this fund would agree with, or would agree with. But no, we wouldn't be able to stop anyone from putting the money in there. Mr. Storrs?
That's a concern that I actually hadn't thought about, is year after year, we receive our carryover funds. If we weren't receiving our carryover funds right now, would we have problems closing out the year?
We're gonna have problems anyway.
Even
but
with,
yeah.
okay. The point is, those are funds that we expect and historically have always received, again, as we talked about earlier, by December. Here we are in April. But the idea that somebody can make a decision to take those funds and put it into this account because we approve this now and not provide it back to us, even if we would end up making a stink in the paper or talking about it here, that is a little bit of a concern to me. I mean, I still think this fund is the right thing. A stabilization fund for this purpose makes a lot of sense, but I do not like that there is no approval or oversight by this board as far as the funds going in. So that is a little concerning to me.
Not to say that we wouldn't be appreciative of funds.
Right, I'm talking about
but
the
yeah.
carryover funds. The point you brought up is exactly my worry.
Mr. Larson?
I don't believe the city / the mayor is under any legal obligation to return carryover funds
Correct.
back to the district, period.
But it's always been
Choose
done,
not to
right?
give it to us
He could
regardless
choose
of
not to
this.
give it to
Yeah.
us, he could choose to spend it on anything he wants,
As long as they remain over debt school spending.
But it's always been done, correct?
historically, but not mandatory.
Mr. Domenici?
If I've read this right, and maybe it's just section B, but that's the point that affords us the special education account. We would have basically we as a school committee, as a separate budget line item, would be requesting funding each year into this account.
We
Doesn't
could-
mean that anybody would provide it, it would still have to be approved, and the mayor and administration would have to provide it, and the council would have to approve the overall budget. But at least it says, it doesn't tell us that we can, what we can do with carryover funds. We have no control over that, but we at least can recommend or ask for funding in this stabilization fund each year. Much like we ask for a certain budget amount, doesn't guarantee that we'll get it.
Any other questions or comments? I mean, I think I share the I share the concerns about the reality of the situation and money going into the funds, but I also, do believe that this is has the potential to be a major benefit to the district in the near and long-term future. So, we place our trust in the administration and our school administration and their relationship with the city, and our ability to articulate clearly, if we disagree, and hopefully come to an agreement with the city as to what funds should be going in here, and hope that we can reach a consensus. Usually that happens. It's not always quick and painless, but it usually happens. So hopefully that would be the case. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Moving on, we approved the minutes earlier, so we'll move on to the consent agenda. Motion to approve an overnight international field trip proposal for 45 grades 9 through 12 students to travel to England, France, and Spain in April of 2022.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept the following gift card donations to the network program at the high school. All donations will be used towards the positive behavioral incentives menu. $25 gift card from Stop and Shop on Pleasant Street in Attleboro. $50 gift card from Stop and Shop on South Washington Street in Attleboro. $25 gift card from Briggs Corner. $25 gift card from Smashburger on Washington Street in Attleboro.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept a donation of $21.75 from Planet Aid, Inc., broken down as follows: $11.25 to Brennan Middle School and $10.50 to Quella Middle School, as per bill number Q12019.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept Motion to accept an anonymous donation in the amount of $3,900 to be used for the purchasing of Attleboro High School band uniforms.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
And that concludes our consent agenda. Moving on to subcommittee reports. Teaching and Learning, Mr. Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had a busy one. We have a couple motions coming out, including one that was not within your packet, although Mr. Geddes circulated the survey that we'll discuss momentarily. First item on our docket was the discussion of two policies. One was an SAT review class policy, and the other one was an early graduation policy. I just want to first commend and thank Assistant Superintendent Regan and Mr. Gorman, the assistant principal at the high school, for providing a lot of insight and recommendations for us as we were guiding through the process. In regards to the SAT review class, Mr. Gorman suggested the policy is antiquated, and Assistant Superintendent Regan also raised a really critical point that a lot of the learning that we're trying to design for our students is getting away from the standardized tests, but more towards the authentic assessments, and that we've seen the recent consortium work that with the Massachusetts Consortium for Innovative Education Assessment. So there was a concern, particularly because this was put in 1991, that maybe it was time to move on from it. The challenge, I think, however, with the committee was that it was twofold. Number one, that so long as SATs remain a gateway for students, they become critical, and we need to make sure, particularly in a community that's less affluent, that may not have access to Princeton Review, that our students who are less fortunate have access to those classes. The other piece of it is that, oddly enough, the class is pretty popular. Close to 200 students take the class right now, so there's demand. And while this administration, would keep it on the books, short of the school committee having a policy in place, a future administration down the road could take it off the books, and our policy guides what our priorities are. So after a robust discussion from the committee, we made a motion to send the policy back to the policy subcommittee for possible editing, to update and remove some of the irrelevant language, for keeping the requirement as part of the course curriculum. One of the things that we discussed was there's a statement in there that the students are able to access the class regardless of their ability to pay. Well, the class is taken during the school day, so that can be wiped out. There's also language in there that says make available to every student. Yes, we've already cleared that hurdle. We also recommended that we remove the second paragraph that states that the data needs to be presented to the school committee. We think that that's burdensome to the administration and that's under-resourced to begin with, and overburdened as it is. So I will entertain a motion from this body. I believe it's in order. I'll defer to you, Mr. Chairman, to send the policy back to the policy subcommittee for discussion. Would that be a proper motion?
I don't think it's necessary, but there's nothing improper about it, so.
Okay. So in the interest of everybody's time, Madam Chair, we'd like to send it back to you for your discussion. The second item on our agenda was the early graduation criteria. And again, this was another policy from 1991. Interestingly, obviously it's a rare circumstance where we have a student who's going to be graduating in under 4 years. But oddly enough, I think our collective tenure, there has been one who was approved for early graduation. So it's not completely irrelevant. We had a really robust discussion about what options are available for students who have completed a lot of their traditional academic coursework that are looking for college, thanks to the efforts of Mr. Geddes and Bristol Community College, and some work that we've done with Rick. Students have an awful lot of access to college courses and obtaining college credit, and I think it's one of the many strengths of our district. I think the challenge with eliminating the policy is and as we've seen with AP credits, where credits don't transfer. And what happens when the student who is ready to go off to a program, let's just take BU for the sake of example, students ready to go, we keep them here for the 4th year, they take credits, and not all of those credits transfer. So what we've essentially done is we've kept the student who is ready to go, and we've held them back. So we wanted to have a policy that would account for those rare circumstances, but we don't see it as an urgent need. So our motion was to, again, send the policy back to the subcommittee with the removal of the R1 and R2, which was a cockamamie description of how they would decide, like no C, I think what was a no C as an average, school committee approval. It was odd to say the least. So we recommended that the administration be given a year just to kind of think about what this would look like. We know their plates are full, but it's something that we need to address. Otherwise, it becomes an ad hoc, and that's when you get yourself into a little bit of hot water. So that will be coming your way again, Madam Chair. The last item on the agenda is something we discussed prior to this meeting. The Teaching and Learning Subcommittee met prior to the budget hearing. Mr. Geddes has been putting together a survey that will reach out to families who have students who are currently in other schools that are not part of Attleboro Public Schools. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Geddes to talk a little bit about the survey.
Sure. So this was something that we approved as a committee a couple of years ago, but never fully got off the ground with the districts through the Nellie May grant going through accessibility, with the new high school coming in. It was a good time to bring this back up again, and of course with our budget issues, with all the money that we're sending to other schools for a variety of reasons. how can we get some of these students back into the district to reduce those outgoing funds. So this is an online survey. Families would get a letter with some login information for each of their students because it's not really a blanket survey for an entire family. We do have families that have a student at Tri-County and a student at St. John's, and those could be for very different reasons. So the gist of it is finding out, what school is your child going to, and why are you sending them there? They are asked to provide up to 3 reasons for their decision, and then based on those 3 choices, we ask some follow-up questions. For example, when I did share with the committee, Ms. Scales wrote back to me talking about class size. That is one of the follow-up questions. Do you feel like the class sizes are too big in Attleboro? Do you feel like we need more teachers? Is it a programming issue? Is it an accommodation issue? I know the special education department often looks for commonalities in our out-of-district placements and services that may be able to be provided to bring a lot of those students back in district. So there isn't a follow-up to everything, but the more information we can get, the better, so that we can better advocate for the district and what the district needs and how we can start to help ourselves a little bit more. There are some, based on the conversation we had earlier tonight, there are some additional changes that we would like to see happen, and I'll continue to work with Ms. Regan on those. But for now, I believe we decided to bring a motion to the full committee about approving this in concept, but not publishing it until the final version is shared with the full committee.
So thank you very much, Mr. Geddes. And I think one of the big pieces is we've done the research in terms of, the students. I think there's 538 students who are currently enrolled in another public institution other than Attleboro Public Schools. The vast majority are in the elementary and middle. I think it's about 170 of the 538 that are at the high school level. Interestingly enough, although Attleboro is one of, I think, 20 towns that send to Foxborough Regional Charter, we account for about 20% plus of their enrollment. What's really interesting is that dwindles down to about 70 students once you hit the high school level. A lot of our students going out of district are going to Bristol Aggie or Tri-County. And then there are a couple of students who just have a virtual school that needs. So I think having a survey that is targeted at those elementary families in conjunction with the urgent need budget that we discussed today, we can really start to target and figure out how we might be better served, keep more of those dollars in, bring more people into the community. So I'll entertain a motion to adopt the survey in principle with final approval at our next meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Finally, and this goes, again, ties into our urgent needs, we talked about the technology plan. The Attleboro Public Schools is, almost 20 years into it, is moving into the 21st century, and finally starting with our one-to-one rollout in grades 5 and 9. I commend the administration for being as fiscally responsible, providing a reasonable access to the abundance of information that is available through digital tools. First, building the infrastructure through the endowments, but also now starting to pull the devices. So now that we have cars to go on the roads that is our infrastructure network. So the administration brought in Norton Public Schools, which has been one-to-one for a couple of years now at least, to do some work with our administration and tech team to talk a little about rollout, thinking about cases, device allocation, insurance. But one of the big pieces of this, and I can just speak from my own experience, is having somebody available at each school to do a lot of troubleshooting. Because our teachers are immensely professional, but they're not omniscient, so they won't always know how to fix the technical needs that arise during a given day. And at my middle school, our help desk is a revolving door. So not having a person there, or having a person who's only there part of the time, is incredibly problematic for sustainability and functionality, and for teachers who need to keep the pacing in really tight periods. I was glad to see that those paraprofessionals are embedded in the budget. It is an urgent need, and we are really encouraged by the steps that have been taken as part of the technology plan to put the infrastructure into practice in the classroom. So we look forward to hearing more updates on that as well. And with that, it concludes my report, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Finally, infrastructure and facilities, Mr. Geddes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had our meeting on Wednesday, April 10th. We continued some ongoing discussion regarding memorials for some notable AHS alumni. Those discussions are continuing, and we expect to bring a couple of motions forward before the end of this academic year. We got an update on the high school project. As of the 60% submittal, we learned that the project is under budget, which is good news. That can lead to some additional investment down the road into the building that will extend its life and give us a higher quality product. We did have conversation about communication related to the project in terms of changes in traffic patterns, et cetera. So it's great to hear that the Facebook page and website have since gone live. But we also talked about utilizing Channel 9, AACS, and the Sun Chronicle for some of that as well. Unfortunate news from that discussion for a variety of reasons related to the current building and the new building project. We did find out that at the end of this summer we are going to have to take the pool at the high school offline. The administration has been working all year in coming up with some partnerships in neighboring communities and within Attleboro for the swim teams in the organizations that use the pool, so those discussions are continuing as well. As for the current high school, when I asked about the current condition, Jason Parento, our director of facilities, kind of gave us a chuckle because he was grateful that we survived another winter. That being said, the heating system problems were just about as problematic, if not worse, this year, and we have discovered and are dealing with some newfound electrical issues throughout a building as well. So, like we said a few months ago, this building is not going down without a fight. The city council closed their public hearing related to the old high school. They, I believe, have not yet taken a vote as to whether or not to take full ownership of the old high school. So we are still paying utility costs on that building. There is an ad hoc committee meeting on Wednesday to talk about the farewells to the old high school and this current building, but more pressing the old high school. The city councils, they actually extended the public hearing a little bit because they wanted public feedback on what to do with the building. There is discussion about, before selling it, putting some stipulations on to make sure that the facade and the look of the building is kept. For Brendan and Wamsutta, SOIs were submitted to the MSBA, so we are waiting to find out where those stand so that the city can plan accordingly. The city did give us permission to seek out some performance contracts. If you remember, after our March or February meeting, we talked about the performance contracts being an opportunity for a lot of our energy-related capital improvements to be addressed without the city having to expand having to cut into its bonding capacity. So that process has started as well. We do have one motion to bring forward. It is a motion, so I will entertain a motion to allow Camp Ramsbottom access to either Studley or Willett Elementary School parking lots based on their preference for use of bus pickups and drop-offs for the summer 2019 camp program.
So moved.
Second.
The reason for this, typically this pickup and drop-off has happened at the high school in the pool parking lot. They're already cutting into that, so that will not be available this summer. In speaking with the design team, we figured it was best to not even have Camp Ramsbottom come onto this campus, The administration will communicate with them about either using Studley or Willett, whichever is easiest for them. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? So the motion passes. We do not have another meeting scheduled for this academic year as of today, but we will be adding one sometime soon. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Geddes. Next, we have open forum. Is there anyone here who would like to address the committee at open forum? I guess not. There being no other business on the agenda, Ms. Scales?
Can we, can we just, fee for service, I just want to make a little plea that fee for service is starting April 29th, correct?
Yep.
And if the families are looking to get that discount, get in, get your applications in before the deadline. That's it.
Thank you. There being no other business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you, everyone.